Camera 14 is completely black. That was the first thing I noticed when the digital clock on my desk flipped to 3:13 a.m. The loud, rhythmic hum of the cooling servers in the basement suddenly dropped an octave, vibrating through the floorboards of the security booth. I leaned closer to the glowing monitors, my reflection staring back at me in the dark glass. I worked the graveyard shift at a decommissioned data storage facility. My job is simple: watch the monitors, make sure no one breaks in, and don't go down to the lower sub-basement. But the problem wasn't that Camera 14 was black. The problem was that this facility only has 13 cameras. I rubbed my eyes, thinking the exhaustion was finally catching up to me, but when I looked back at the screen, the static on Camera 14 began to part like a heavy fog. The image slowly resolved into a grainy, low-light feed. It didn't show the outside parking lot or the main lobby. It showed a long, narrow concrete hallway. The walls were painted a sickly, pale yellow, illuminated by violently flickering fluorescent lights. There were no doors, no windows, just a seemingly endless, repeating corridor that defied the actual architectural footprint of the building. It was an artificial space that felt perfectly real, but mathematically wrong. My radio crackled to life with a burst of heavy, deafening static. A low, distorted voice, sounding almost like it was speaking backward underwater, whispered a single phrase: "You are on the fastest available route." A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. I recognized that hallway. The entrance wasn't on the ground floor. It was down in the lower sub-basement, the one place my manager explicitly told me never to enter. I should have ignored it. I should have just sat in my chair and waited for the morning shift. But human curiosity is a dangerous, self-destructive thing. I grabbed my heavy metal flashlight, unclipped my radio, and stepped out of the booth. The air in the stairwell was freezing. The descent to the lower sub-basement felt impossibly long. When I finally reached the bottom, I stood in front of a heavy, rusted iron door. It was slightly cracked open. A faint, sickening yellow light was spilling out into the dark. I pushed the door open. My boots didn't hit normal concrete. I stepped onto a damp, beige carpet. The smell of rotting ozone and old moisture instantly filled my lungs. I wasn't in the data center anymore. I had crossed into the hallway from the camera feed. I looked behind me, but the iron door was gone, replaced by another stretch of identical yellow walls. The internet calls this no clipping, falling out of reality and into a liminal space, an endless repeating maze that shouldn't exist. The isolation was immediate and suffocating. I walked for what felt like hours, took 3 left turns, and somehow ended up exactly where I started. The geometry of the place was broken. Then, the buzzing of the fluorescent lights above me started to pop. One by one, the bulbs shattered, plunging sections of the endless hallway into absolute pitch black, and beneath the sound of breaking glass, I heard it. It wasn't human footsteps. It sounded like wet leather dragging heavily across the damp carpet. Slap, drag, slap, drag. I stood completely frozen, pressing my back against the yellow wallpaper at the far end of the corridor. Standing just outside the reach of the remaining lights was a towering shadow. Its limbs were unnaturally long, hanging loosely at its sides. It didn't have a face, just a smooth, pale expanse of skin, but it was looking right at me. The creature let out a sound that I will never forget. It was a human scream, heavily distorted, like a corrupted audio file. It lunged forward. Its movements were rigid and glitchy, like a virus forcing its way through a physical space. I turned and ran blindly into the maze. I took corners so fast I slammed into the walls, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly in the dark. The dragging sounds behind me were gaining ground. The air grew so cold I could see my breath. I burst through a narrow archway and tripped, slamming hard onto the carpet. I scrambled backward, waiting for the cold, unnatural hands to grab me. But when I looked up, I wasn't in the yellow hallway. I was lying on the concrete floor of the security booth. The digital clock read 3:14 a.m. Only 1 minute had passed. I dragged myself up to the desk, gasping for air. I looked at the monitors. There were only 13 camera feeds. The 14th was gone. But sometimes, late at night, when the server hum drops an octave, My radio crackles, and I hear that heavy, wet dragging sound coming from the stairwell. They say these endless digital spaces don't exist. They say it's just an internet myth. But I know what I saw. And if you ever find a door that isn't on the blueprint, do not open it, because in the back rooms, they are always watching.